Good morning. It's great to be back in Miami Lakes. We were fortunate enough to be here down in South Florida yesterday to see the Dolphins win the home opener. I'm also, just as a governor who really wants to see the state of Florida return to college football glory, hasn't exactly worked out for Florida State so far this year, but I will note Miami Hurricanes look very good, so maybe we have a return of the mystique of the U as we go through this season. So it's always good to be here. I'm joined, of course, by our Lieutenant Governor, Jeanette Nunez, Representative Tom Fabrio, and then we're going to hear from a number of residents of South Florida, Jonathan Carcassis, Kevin Patrick Cortina, and Doris Gonzalez. And what brings us here today is we want to solicit input about making sure that we're doing all we can for people that live and own condominium units in the state of Florida. It was over 3 years ago now where we had one of the most traumatic events in the history of the state of Florida, the collapse of the Champlain Towers in Surfside, Florida. And that was something that this is one of the 3 a.m. calls that I received as governor, or somewhere in the wee hours of the morning, that there had been like a partial collapse. And you're thinking in your mind, maybe part of a roof or something like that. But then to actually arrive on the scene later that day, you saw something that was truly catastrophic. And we had people who were simply asleep in their beds, and ended up descending to their death based on that really, really brutal collapse. And I think that it was a shocking thing. The family members who lost their loved ones, it's not that it's ever easy, but it was a real punch in the gut for the community and everything. And people rallied to the cause. The first responders were there doing everything they can. There were a lot of folks who needed help, who were given help, and there's a lot that's happened since then. But one of the things that happened during that time was people want to know, well, how could this have happened? And I would know we still don't have the final report from the federal NIST agency, and we're over 3 years later. And I'm not saying these are easy things, but we're still waiting on that definitive report. But there was a desire in the Florida legislature to do things to make sure, or to help ensure, that something like this would never happen again. And it was not something that was easy. I remember I was asked in the days after that, oh, aren't you guys got to do, and I was like, well, they got to make sure they do it right. Legislature's going to need to talk to their constituents. They're going to need to go through the legislative process and try to create something that makes sense for the state of Florida. And I think that was a good faith effort that they have done. There's been a series of reforms that have been done. I just signed a bill this year to increase transparency in some of the associations and to really help empower some of the unit owners to have more visibility on some of the things. Now, condo associations, as we know, are regulated by localities in Florida. Laws across the state have varied on when safety inspections should be completed and how much in reserves the association should keep on hand for repairs. In response to the Surfside, the legislature initiated requirements for condo associations to complete regular safety inspections and to make preventative repairs to keep buildings safe. And if you tell anybody there's things that you need to do so that something like Surfside doesn't happen, I mean, obviously people are going to want to do that. That's something that's very, very important. Now, the deadline to complete these inspections is coming up at the end of the year. As a result of these new measures, large fee assessments were levied to meet the requirements of the inspections and repairs at the last minute. Now, these condo associations should have been keeping reserves on hand, but many failed to do so or acted without the fiscal prudence they should have to make sure the associations had the resources on hand to make the necessary repairs. But because of this, the cost burdens of these inspections and repairs are being passed on to unit owners with very short deadlines. Now, this legislation was well intended. The legislature engaged in a good faith effort, but it sounds, and this is feedback we've been receiving now for many months, it sounds like there are a lot of condo unit owners who are just not in the financial position to pay large assessments on such short deadlines. And these deadlines loom all the while the federal government has not released the final report, as I mentioned, outlining the cause of the Surfside collapse. And I just wanted to come down here, solicit input, but also just say, we understand there's a lot of anxiety out there amongst condo owners about these impending inspections and potential assessments for major repairs that are in some cases long overdue. We want to solicit input from Floridians to be able to provide relief for people. We want to have all these units, be safe. But I think we know we've got a lot of condo units in Florida. There's a wide variety of things that may need or not need to be done with different buildings. And there may be things that may not relate to structural integrity that would be very expensive. And is there ways that you can kind of come to a reasonable accommodation on that? Is there ways you could potentially provide some low interest loans perhaps to help get these things done so that you don't have crushing assessments? So I think that there's a lot of ideas out there, but the bottom line is this. We want our condos to be safe in the state of Florida, but we also want to make sure that any safety measures are implemented in ways that are reasonable and affordable to the residents. We don't want to see people forced out of a unit because they have a crushing assessment. And so we are going to hear some feedback from folks here who are unit owners in Southern Florida. We have a lot of condo units in Florida, I think, as most people know, particularly in this part of the state. We have a lot of buildings that came online, half a century ago. And that's just the reality that we're dealing with here. So we want to be doing this in the way that's most intelligent. And I said at the time, when you don't have all the facts about what happened, it's very possible that you're going to need to go back and tweak some of the legislation or do additional things to be able to help get where we need to go. But what we want to be in a situation is where people's homes are safe, these buildings are safe, but that also that people can stay in their homes and they're not driven out of this by some of these really, really gargantuan assessments. And I think there's been a lot of mismanagement with some of these associations over the years. People have talked about that's really ruthless politics when you start getting into some of these condo associations. I mean, it's just that's developed over a long time. We've taken some good steps, I think, to help provide more transparency and accountability, but I know that there may be more to do. So that's why we're here. I think that the legislature, given that the deadlines are coming by the end of the year, we'll have opportunities in this calendar year to be able to provide some reforms and relief as appropriate. So we're here to solicit impact. I would urge, I know we have Representative Fabrio here, but I would urge all the members of the legislature, you'll be talking to your constituents. We need to be developing these ideas now so that these things can be implemented in time to prevent people from being forced out of their homes. And so with that, I'll kick it over to the Lieutenant Governor for some opening comments.
Great. Well, good morning, and Governor, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you in South Florida, and we, of course, understand that we need to make sure that we're balancing the needs of condo safety but affordability. As the governor mentioned, after the Surfside tragedy occurred, he was on site every day, the First Lady, myself, and we saw firsthand the tragedy. And working with the legislature, some of them which are here, Representative Fabrio, Representative Rizzo, and some of our local officials, I know Senator Garcia is here as well, we were able to really work with them and see what was going to ensue. And so they took action. Of course, we are going to continue to work to make sure that when condo owners are addressing these challenges, and we've heard from so many of them across the state, we understand the plight. We understand, especially our senior community, when they're faced with these types of assessments, they've worked their entire lives to be able to retire with dignity and stay in their own homes. And so for us, that's something that weighs very heavily. We want to make sure that we're addressing those issues responsibly and fiscally prudent, in a fiscally prudent manner. And we also want to provide opportunities for those that are here today to share some of those challenges so we can continue to look at opportunities to help them. And so our administration is fully committed to finding solutions that work for condo owners and board members alike. We have seen over the past several years situations that have been extremely troubling with corrupt boards that have taken over. And so again, for our condo owners, those people that have paid in, that have worked hard, that want to make sure that they can continue to live in their homes, that's going to be something that we're focused on, and making sure that those board members are making the right decisions for those homeowners, and then also providing transparency, accountability, and addressing these issues head on. This is a governor that never shies away from a challenge, and he's going to be here. He's going to listen throughout the state of Florida, but in particular in this community where we have so many condo associations, and making sure that this community is heard loud and clear. So thank you for being here, Governor.
Okay, we'll kick it over to Representative Fabrio.
Governor, thank you so much, and Lieutenant Governor, thank you for coming here to the town of Miami Lakes to listen to the community on this really important issue. And you know, the way I look at it, this morning actually, I was buying pastelitos, and I was at the bakery, and a constituent approached me this morning, and he said, I've lived in my condo association for the last 25 years. I'm on a fixed income, and they just all of a sudden raised the assessments, and I can't afford to live there anymore. What can you guys do in the legislature to help us not lose our homes? And that echoes calls that we've received in my office and issues that we've seen. And I wholly echo your comments in that we need to balance the health and safety. We can't have buildings that are not structurally sound, but I think we need to figure out how to implement a reserve study that takes into account critically deficient buildings or buildings that can take a little bit more time to build up those reserves. So I really appreciate you coming here, and I'm looking forward to listening to the comments from the members of the community who are here on the panel.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Okay, Jonathan Carcassis, Acting Manager and Broker Associate, Cardin Realty and Investments.
First, thank you for being here, Governor. I think it's important to have a platform like this to discuss these issues that are so important to condo owners such as myself. It shows your leadership and what's made Florida the envy of the nation, and that you're here talking to the people directly. That's important. So my name is Jonathan Carcassis. I'm a real estate broker with over 18 years in the industry. I'm a condo owner in several condominiums that are deemed older buildings. I've also served on the board of directors of several associations. In total, they are comprised of over 1,000 units. And I've seen it firsthand, whether it be the 40-year certification that I've been involved with and acquiring for multiple of the associations. I feel deeply connected to this issue, and it's affecting many condo owners such as myself. So thank you for opening this discussion, and hopefully we can have some good ideas brought out there.
Great. Okay, Kevin Patrick Cortina, Hialeah resident and Condo Association President.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you to your administration, because this has been a big issue. Like you said, I'm the president of a condo association, and we have over 197 units. I was recently elected onto the board less than a year ago. And there are several issues. The main one that you focused on, which is the retirees, people living on fixed incomes, who might have been living. I have some 30% of the people living in my building have lived there since the inception of the building, since the 70s. So they're literally looking at their entire life, where their kids grew up, where they raised their families, and they're struggling to make ends meet. And then with this impending, the impending raise of the assessments over the last few years for structural necessities, and now for the pending one for reserves, it's becoming the topic of conversation. Even at church, I'm getting people walking up to me at church and saying, hey, you know, what's going on? How are we going to do this? How are we going to stay living here? And if we have to sell, where are we going to go? So this is very important, and I really, really appreciate this effort.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, Doris Gonzalez, who is a condo owner down here in Miami-Dade County.
Hi, thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for being here today. We know that your administration, it continues to work to ensure that condo residents like myself, that their concerns are addressed. I'm a condo owner in Miami-Dade, and we have been impacted by the increase. of the condo. Our building first major renovation started in 2019. Our HOA went from 900 to 1,300, in addition to the special assessment, which is average $50,000 per unit. So it's like $450 for our unit for 15 years. So it was much needed. The repairs were much needed, necessary to maintain the buildings. Understandably, the expense was not well received by some residents. We have a lot of residents that are retired and on a fixed income, and some of them had to sell their unit after being there for over 20 years. So I really appreciate us bringing this topic to the table.
Great, yeah, and I think, one, just people that have lived in these units for a long time, particularly that are older on fixed income, not being able to afford to even stay. But then I think you raised a good point, like, okay, say the condo's probably gone up in value, even if they need some reform, just because, the market's gone up. So say you sell, but then it isn't like it's easy to afford other places, right? I mean, it puts you in a big quandary. Let me go to Tom Fabrio. So I know you've been talking to a lot of people, your constituents. What is the temperature amongst your colleagues in the legislature? It seems to me that probably a lot of them think that this is something that needs to be addressed by them. So can you give us the lay of the land as you see it?
Absolutely. This is an issue that's affecting us definitely throughout South Florida. I believe throughout the state and the areas where the condos are prevalent. But it really is something that needs to be addressed throughout. I mean, when we get together, it's something that's brought up by my colleagues that we are all hearing from the communities. I'll tell you this, I mean, in particular, my father lives in a condo out in Aventura, and they're dealing with this issue as well. Fixed income senior citizens are in a situation where they're having to confront these excessive assessments that are being brought up to meet the reserves for buildings that sometimes have deferred maintenance way too long. So now the assessment's too high. Unfortunately, what they're seeing is that it's not that easy to sell, because when you try to sell that unit and you do your seller's disclosure, you have to disclose these assessments and the repairs that are required. So that's causing issues with the market throughout. So it's causing a problem for these seniors. I believe there's an appetite to address this issue. I believe personally that this is probably the most important issue in the state of Florida at this time.
So you guys have specific suggestions that people like Tom in the legislature could take and analyze and chew over?
Definitely. One of the major things that I spoke about was, at least in my building, the people in my building, they want the building to be structurally sound. Right. That makes perfect sense. We were blessed that 2 years ago, we went ahead and started structural repair, and we were able to get financing for that structural repair, so they wouldn't get hit with that initial cost, and we were able to do it over 6% over 10 years, so that it could be somewhat more affordable. And then what happened there was that over that period of time, the previous board, in line with the management company that they had, they really misappropriated what should have been done. The money was there, they misappropriated it. There was no real teeth to it, and I hear a lot of things are being spoken about directed towards the board, and I know that now the law has some teeth against the board, right? But I think the property manager should have some place in there where they're literally directing it. In many cases, the board members are elected by their peers, right, by the residents, but they may not have the capacity to actually do the job. So they just oversee what the property manager tells them. So I think maybe we should also kind of look at the property managers. I think that might be an important place to take a look at. And as far as the structural and then the reserves, I think it's like a domino effect, where we know we got to get the structure fixed, but the reserve issue has been that issue for over 50 years when the law was originally written, right? So in 50 years now, in 1 year, bam, you got to get all your reserves in line. So if it's been okay to leave it going for 50 years, maybe we can have like a slow build to getting those reserves in line, instead of just in 1 year, you got to get hit with it, especially since we had the structural thing, right? So we did the structural, we got to get the structure. I mean, health and safety, perfect, that's paramount. But if the reserve could wait 50 years, maybe it could wait 2 years, 3 years. We can roll it out slowly over time, so that it's not, back-to-back hits over the head. And when we're building we're right now, setting up to pass the budget, right, for next year, right? So we're preparing ourselves. We're looking at what the costs. Obviously, everything has gone up, right? Inflation has gone up. Inflation has gone up paramount over the last few years. So now we're looking at having to, raise the maintenance to a place where it's in line with inflation, but also to incur the reserves. So, and then the reserves is more than likely going to be a 90% increase or a double. When I took over the condo association a little less than a year ago, we found that the CAM with the board were running a $40,000 a month deficit in the building. How is that possible? So when we go and have to redo the budget for them, right, because they didn't even do the budget, we raised the maintenance 74%, and people were going wild. And we did that as a courtesy to the people. I live there as well. I'm an owner and I live there. And we raised it up to 37 cents a square foot. That was 74% increase. But in the average in Miami-Dade County, mainland, is between 50 and 60 cents. So you could only imagine if we would have gone up to what we probably should have gone up to. And they had a problem with it. They've been able to figure out a way to deal with it. And now when we go to do this budget and we're looking at the reserves that need to be there, obviously we need to have it so that when the next time we have to put the roof on, the money's there and we're not hitting them with a special assessment, but that maybe there can be some leeway for them to roll into it, because I think that's going to be a big issue.
So I think what you're saying on the reserves is, okay, we have the Surfside issue where, if you have a building, I think the Surfside building was, I think, in the early 80s. We have some that are a lot older than that, too. The notion that somehow a building would be unsafe and could lead to that, like, that's obviously unacceptable. But then these reserve requirements are hitting all these other properties where that's really not maybe an acute risk right now. There may be other things that need to be done, but does it need to be done on such an accelerated time frame?
Exactly.
Do you have any?
Absolutely, and I agree with Kevin that safety is number one priority, I think, for everybody, and that's not negotiable. The big sticking point is the cost of this. It's the maintenance fees, it's the special assessments. So I think it's important to find ways to phase, maybe the reserves out, just like you said, and finding ways to help those homeowners that are, like you said, on fixed incomes and can't afford. And I've experienced actually a similar story to Kevin's. Last year, I was informed that one of my associations, the entire board resigned. I had to volunteer. I had to rally up a couple unit owners that I knew. I said, hey, we gotta, I don't want to go to receivership or anything like that. We open up the books and we find out that they hadn't even passed a proper budget in about 2 years. They took a loan out for repairs for about $1 million. Never budgeted for it, never assessed for it. So my first interaction with the ownership about, 30 to 60 days after we, took over the board was, hey, I'm about to double your fees between maintenance fees and assessments. And that's a tough conversation to have with anybody, and let alone, people that just can't afford it. So this is something that I think it's happening all over, and it's an important issue to educate boards and property managers. They go hand in hand to make sure that we avoid situations like that.
So in a scenario like ours, our building is in the midst of, the special assessment, structural maintenance and repairs, and the actual work is almost complete. So one of the concerns, many concerns of the condo owner is that will the reserves for our building be required, immediately? And if not, will we have?
So you've already made the repairs, you're saying?
They're nearly done.
Yes,
So
okay.
it's been like since 2019 they've
Right.
been doing it. So now it's like, will our building be exempt, or we have to meet that deadline in addition to the special assessment and the HOA that we pay? So.
Now, if we were able to do something, particularly for some of like the older buildings that really do need something along the lines of maybe like an interest-free loan? Would it be better to do that to the association or to the individual unit owners?
So, at least from the experience that I've had, right, it becomes cumbersome for the association to take over. So we have 197 units, and the financing that we got from the bank, 10-year financing over 6% over 10 years, that was great. But what's happened is it now becomes more administrative for the condo association. It adds a level of complexity, financial complexity, that really shouldn't be there. So I think that it would have probably been better to have done it in an individual basis, because it would help alleviate some of that administrative problem within the association itself. So I literally spend maybe an hour to 2 hours every single day dealing with some form of this when it comes to the bank, when it comes to people's payments, and then so not only am I administering the monthly maintenance fees, right, that we have to collect and assess every month, but then I'm also doing an assessment for the special assessment, let's call it, for those structural fees. And again, we gladly took on this role, right, and I lend myself to the building and to my community, but it becomes a burden. So I think that would be better on an individual basis, where you go directly to the person, they can apply for it, and then it's a one-on-one relationship with the bank or with the financing. It will alleviate some of that problem, and it also, I think, provides better transparency, and it provides less of an avenue for maybe misappropriation of funds if it's done individually directly to the finance company.
Do you have an opinion on that?
I can appreciate that point of view. I might look at it a little bit differently. I would hope that the board of directors are going to follow what their fiduciary duties are, and take on a loan and appropriate it accordingly. Again, that's just my point of view, but I would hope that the associations could put that money to good use and not mismanagement.
Again, it's not about mismanaging the funds, so to speak. It's about the added administrative costs or administrative time to having to individually deal with payments and non-payments. So, you fund the money, and then you have your budget and everything's in line to make the payments and do everything in a timely manner and correctly. But it's the collection of funds and that relationship with that administration that becomes a hassle. You have to give up, they have a 90 days where they can be delinquent until you can send a notice. And then they have 30 days for them to pay you the money that was owed for those previous 90 days. And then at 120 days, then you can send them to collections, right? And that's an entire process that's being added on top, to the board. It becomes an issue of transparency, right? So the board we run, we have meetings, we let people know exactly what's happening, where the money's being spent, how it's being spent, just because of what happened in the past and the lack of transparency in the past, right? So I believe that it's not so much of how the money is going to be spent, it's just the administrative problems that come with having to have the building administer the reception of the funds.
Governor, if I may?
Yep.
Let me ask you, I think you're describing an association that's self-managed, is that right?
Yes.
And I hear you about that administrative burden for a self-managed association where the actual unit owners are the ones that are actually doing all the paperwork and whatnot. But there are also associations that are professionally managed by a community association manager licensed and whatnot. And I think in some cases, maybe you agree or not, that with a CAM that's licensed and bonded, they can take on that burden and perhaps streamline some of that funding that's required to make some of those common element repairs. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that 100%. And when you have a good CAM, that's priceless.
And I think that's critical, what you just said, that are good CAMs.
So right, exactly. I'm speaking from our example, right? When I take over, when we get elected and the new board is elected in November, immediately the CAM that was in place, he dumped us. Just dumped us. Because according to him, he cannot work with this new administration. So I didn't take offense because I totally understood that he can't deal with the transparency issue and someone who can actually understand exactly what's going on. So when you're what is it, once bitten, twice shy, right? So the board, as well as our community, didn't want to go back to a CAM. Trust me, my life would be so much easier if I could find a trustworthy and a partnership with a CAM that is going to do a good job, right? But when the community is saying, hey, we just got burned. We've been doing it for 40 years without a CAM, and then we pick up a CAM for the last 3 years, and then we get burned by them. Do we really want to go back to it? You know, and so I kind of have to, you know, pay mind to what the community is asking. Agreed, 100%. A good CAM, especially once you're over 50 units, that's definitely a key necessity.
Thank you.
Anything else?
And just to chime in, I think good CAM, super important. I'm a big advocate for typically going with a larger management company because, I mean, they have the backing to, you know, oversee whether it be the accounting side of things or the general management of things. And that goes more or less to what I'm used to dealing with. I mean, if you're self-managing your condo, that's tough. It's a thankless job, for sure. But that's why my mindset is if the associations had those funds directly lent to them, they would have the money right away to do the important things they need to get done. If it goes to the individual, we're hoping they do the right thing, but if they don't pay, now you're kind of domino affecting back to the issue that you're in right now of not having the money to do those repairs, right?
Where I've seen the individual payment part in other associations, you know, associates, friends of mine that run their boards and stuff, is that, yeah, the individual gets the assessment, they find the financial backing, whether they pay it up front or they find their own financing, and then they make the payment to the board. Either way, if you gotta pay. Right, so the idea that I believe what the governor was speaking to was a program where maybe we can get for these people a zero interest or a low interest loan over a long period of time, so that way they're not hit directly with that burden.
Sure.
Like I said, when we were assessed 2 years ago, the $2 million assessment that was put on the building, we were able to get financing. The board was able to get financing, right? So then the board took on that responsibility. And with a good CAM, yeah, they would have handled that financing portion. What I think would be easier is what I've seen in other buildings, especially very affluent buildings, right? Where they're directly going to the ownership, they're asking the ownership for whatever the amount is, and then that owner finds the financing. Whether it's they pay it out of their pocket directly, they find the bank to finance them, or in this case, or maybe they can get the state to give them a zero or low interest loan over a long period of time, and that way the financing is there and they're not hit with that burden. I'll tell you that the people in my building are very grateful that the bank was able to finance them, because instead of coming out of pocket, you know, tens of thousands of dollars, they're paying maybe $100 or under $200 a month, you know, and that made it possible to stay. Well, and but again, when you look at that on top of having to increase the maintenance fees, and then on top of that, now having to assess for the reserves, it becomes, you know, untenable for many. And that's the fear. The fear is that you don't want to break the community up. They have nowhere to go, you know, so you don't want to break up the community. You don't, they've been there their whole lives. They raise their families there. They're hoping to stay there until, you know, through the end of their time, and you don't want to take that small thing away from them, but it's a financial problem, right? And most of these people are not looking to, they want to pay their bill, they want to get it done, they just want some form of assistance or some pressure relief, let's say, a relief valve.
Great. Anything else for the good?
So I think we need to consider extending deadlines or finding another way forward that still prioritizes like safety, but extending deadlines for the looming deadline that's coming.
Great. Anything else for the good of the order?
Governor, that's it. I mean, I think we've emphasized the issue on the fixed income seniors as being the priority, I believe. I say that humbly for my community, but I think across the board, this is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Great. Well, I appreciate people taking the time. The bottom line is we want residents in Florida to have a safe but affordable place to live. And we have an instance here where we're going to need to provide some relief. There's a variety of different ideas out there. So my challenge as the legislature is, people like Tom and others, keep talking to your constituents. Let's get the best ideas. But we do need to do something this year. I don't think this is something that you can just put off to next March or April. I think there are a lot of looming deadlines, and we got to have a plan forward to be able to keep people in their units if that's what they want to do. And we want to continue to stand strong for safety. But I do think there are certainly going to be a lot of these condos where they have actually done things, people have paid, and now they're being hit up again, to meet a deadline when there may not need to be things done immediately. So we got to look at this and always keep the best interest of the condo residents in mind. We've done a lot of things that I think have been positive on transparency. Clearly, there was a lot of practices that had gone on in a lot of these associations over many decades that were problematic. I don't think there's any question about that. And so that's good. But you also got to look at, okay, what are we dealing with now? What relief do people need? And there's probably a variety of tools that we can use. So I stand ready, willing, and able to work with the legislature to make sure that we're able to make the proper solutions so that folks have peace of mind and are able to continue to enjoy living in the free state of Florida. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions. Yes, hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. You will not be surprised to know this is a tough topic. Can you weigh in the effort to oppose Amendment 4, can you weigh in on the backlash, possible legal maneuvers from people who see state resources being
everything's above board. We have resources to do public service announcements across a wide variety of fronts. That goes to the Department of Transportation, for example, on safe driving. It's being used by the ACA agency to basically provide people with accurate information. And I think that that's something that's really important because, quite frankly, a lot of people don't usually get that in the normal bloodstream. So everything that's put out is factual. It is not electioneering. It's things that can absolutely be done through these public service announcemements. And I'm glad they're doing it. I think it's informative. And I think a lot of people will be informed by what the messaging is put out.
So to clarify, it is state resources, is what you're saying, not another public money.
So we have a wide variety of pots of money that are used for public service announcements, and that happens all the time, and we're continuing to do that. You have, I think, the Florida Department of Transportation is running PSAs, ACA is running PSAs, and so is the Florida Department of Health, all touching on issues that are important to Floridians, and so we want to continue to do that, but that is not inappropriate at all. That's been done for decades, and it's not weighing in on any particular measure whether you should vote for or against something. That's obviously being done in other avenues, but not with those agencies.
You made mention of the Dolphins right at the start of this. There seemed to be a pretty serious matter involving Tyreek Hill. Maybe you saw something along those lines, and an officer has been reassigned, and just wondering what you take away from that, and if you saw that and what your thoughts are.
So I have not gotten any details on it. I think they're going to do an investigation, and I think that that's appropriate. I was pleased to see he did well in the game, and it was good for the team what happened on the field. But I think that I have confidence in agencies throughout this state that they want to uphold the highest standards of professionalism. And if for some reason that wasn't followed here, I know that they will make that clear. But I'll let that investigation take place. Yep. So what I said at the beginning was Surfside was a traumatic experience for this state. It was one of the worst days in the history of the state of Florida. I mean, we lost 98 people. Families just sleeping in their unit in the middle of the night, all of a sudden collapse. And I remember arriving on the scene, there were stories around the world of people being rescued out of rubble weeks after it happened. And you had all of the people, the first responders, descended immediately, and they were searching, they were trying to do. And all the families were just beset with anguish, but there was hope that some of these folks could be rescued. When I went down that same day and looked at what was going on, I was just like, I don't see how you could possibly, I mean, it was so violent, just the absolute rubble that we saw. I remember smelling the smoke because there were fires that were happening underneath. And it just, I had a big pit in my stomach because I was like, I wanted to be hopeful. We obviously were going to help with any resources we could, but it was like, this is just catastrophic. And it was really painful. So I think what the legislature did was they had the information that they had. Clearly there were problems with condominium management just generally. This was something that we did not want to see happen. There were a lot of people that were concerned who were living in these condos about what may have been neglected over the years. They did not have all information about the cause of Surfside. As I mentioned, NIST still has not done the definitive report, and we're over 3 years after Surfside happened, and they don't think they're going to do the report, I guess, until sometime next year where that will be. So, and I said at the time, because I had a lot of people telling me, like, well, what are you going to do all this? And I said, look, we don't really know what the reason was. We got to be careful about how you're doing this. So I think what the legislature did with the transparency, I think some of I think what we did this year is really help aiding transparency, helping unit owners. I think it was well-intentioned. I think it was a good faith effort to try to prevent a Surfside if you can do it. And I think everyone, if you can prevent that, we would do what we need to do to prevent it. But there's a lot of moving parts on this. We've got a lot of units throughout the state of Florida. Some were built a long time ago. Some have come online more recently. And so you just got to navigate this. But this is what happens with legislation. What happens with legislation is you have it. There's things that can work well. Sometimes you need to tweak. That's not unusual. And it certainly wasn't something that was unforeseen with this, just given the circumstances, given we didn't have a definitive cause, and given that we really have a lot of these units up and down the coast in Florida. So the bottom line is they made a good faith effort. But I think listening to Tom, talking with other senators and representatives, their constituents are concerned about this. This is something that is significant. So I have confidence they're listening to that. I have confidence that they're going to be able to come back and provide some solutions so that, again, we want people to be safe. We never want to see anything like Surfside happen again. We also want to make sure people can afford to stay in their units. That's something that's just really, really important. I mean, it isn't like costs haven't been going up for everything under the sun the last 3.5 years. If you look at groceries, you look at everything that people do on a daily basis. And so to get a massive special assessment on a fixed income, that's going to be difficult no matter what. But I'd say particularly now, it'd be one thing if we had 5 or 6 years of a low inflation or no inflation environment, it'd still be tough. But man, now it's even more difficult. So we're mindful of that. And I'm open to a variety of solutions to be able to get us through this in a way that keeps people in their units. I mean, I think that there are some things that need to be done. I don't know that every single repair is preventing a Surfside, right? I mean, that's just the reality. So why would we want to be forcing people to have to make a choice to leave based on repairs which may need to be done but may not need to be done right at this instant, or may be able to be done over a period of time where you can absorb the cost better. So let's just be nimble with this. Let's listen to people. and let's make sure they're able to stay in their home. But I think the legislature made a good faith effort. I am not surprised that there have been issues, with this. Remember, I was being attacked at the time saying, oh, the governor's not demanding this. And the reason why I wasn't is because I didn't have all the facts about what happened with Surfside. And I didn't want to come up with a legislative proposal that I was running, telling them to pass if I didn't know exactly what needed to be done. And even today, we still don't have that report. So I think there were just a lot of moving parts. I think there was a good faith effort. I think there were a lot of good things that came out of that. But let's just make sure we get it right. We have time to be able to do it. I know that people have had huge concerns, condo owners across the state. I know the members of the legislature are listening. I can tell you our administration is listening. We stand by, ready, willing, and able to sign additional legislation as needed.
Governor, can you shed some light as much as the public on the election police going after people they think have had fraudulent ballot?
Sure. So these ballot initiatives, people sign petitions, and what the Department of State had seen was there was a lot of complaints about this one group that was supporting Amendment 4 for a wide variety of reasons. And turns out they looked, this group submitted dozens of petitions on behalf of dead people. They saw those petitions being submitted. There are other petitions that have actually been validated where the signatures do not match the voter file. So they were getting all of those complaints, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're following the law, and they're ensuring that anyone that broke the law is going to be held accountable. Our tolerance in the state of Florida for any type of election-related fraud is zero. We are not going to put up with it. And so if they identify, they have identified examples that are going to be referred to Florida Department of Law Enforcement, those are going to be pursued. I mean, if someone's committing fraud, that undermines your rights as law-abiding citizens. We don't want to go down that road. We've made huge strides in Florida on this. I think our election system certainly for the general elections have worked well in the last couple of election cycles. But this whole thing with the petitions, there's a lot of seedy activity that goes on. These people come in from out of state. We've tried to do reforms to kind of police this, but I think there was a lot of things going on that wasn't right. So that is going to be investigated, and I think that they verified fraudulent activity already. But anything that they find, is going to be pursued, and people are going to be held accountable. We don't want to see election fraud in the state of Florida.
Can you name that group?
The Department of State can, yeah. It was the one group that was really spearheading the petition gathering for Amendment 4.
A lot of people are listening to the conversation regarding HOAs, fees and assessments, and maybe this is a question for Representative Fabrio. Outside of no interest or low interest loans, and outside of staggering major construction repair projects, what other remedies are there to offer Floridians to stay in their condo units?
Well, that's why we're doing this, right? I mean, there's folks that have been in condos for a long time. There's folks that have been on boards. There's folks that have been involved in managing. I mean, we've got a lot of knowledge and insight in the state of Florida, and we want to be able to develop the best ideas. So I think those two you mentioned, I think, are probably some of the more obvious ones that people have pointed out. But I want to entertain anything that is sensible. So we wanted to bring people in today to talk. I hope this roundtable will spark a larger conversation throughout the state. I would just urge Floridians, talk to your representatives, talk to your senators, talk to your state reps, and let them know what you're facing. Let them know what types of reforms could be helpful to be able to make sure that people are safe and are able to stay in their homes. So.
Governor, I want to thank you for your leadership here at Surfside. I was on the ground, you were there, you were phenomenal. Thank you for the resources you provided to us, and thank you for your leadership now with this condo reform. And here in Miami-Dade County, two of the issues that they brought up are very important. I think is the zero interest loans. We passed something in 2002 that's been very helpful, and also the limiting time, extending the time for these payments. I think those are things that we can really look at, Governor. But again, I just want to thank you very much for the leadership you're providing on these issues. We really do need some help, not only here in Miami, but all across State County, Miami-Dade, and across the state.
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. I mean, people that are on fixed income in particular that have been in these units for a long time, a lot of people don't want to go anywhere, right? It's just not, I mean, people have a routine. They're enjoying being where they are. But then you look at the thing, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people just generally. Clearly, there's been a real estate boom in terms of values over the last 3 or 4 years in Florida. People that had homes that were worth $350,000, some of those homes are 5, 6, 7, sometimes even more than that. There are people that had 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes, single-family homes that were $500,000 that have gone for a lot more, and especially 2021 and 22. I mean, there was a big influx of demand to buy, and so a lot of people had an opportunity to make money off their home, especially people that were free and clear of a mortgage, people to live. And it's like, okay, you could get a pretty big windfall, but then the question is, okay, if I sell my home, then where do I go from there? It's not that you can afford other things easily because the market was so hot. So that's just the reality that even if somebody was like, I don't like these assessments, I've been in the unit for a while, I'm fine to just move on. It's not that easy to do, particularly here. Now, this is a separate issue from the condo and the condo residents, but we've noticed this just generally with workforce, making sure people can afford to live. Our Live Local has led to more units coming online. You're seeing more multifamily, but we want police officers, teachers, particularly when they're younger, to be able to afford. And it's just not tenable to be having to commute an hour, hour and a half to go to work. And that's not just true in Miami. I mean, it's true in other parts of the state as well. So this affordability is just really, really important. We are all united on safety. We're all united on if there are things that need to be done where one of these buildings to prevent what happened in Surfside, it needs to be done, and we just have to do it. But I think there's a lot of runway between that situation and run-of-the-mill associations right now and run-of-the-mill unit owners and some of the maintenance that may have been neglected and does need to be done, but maybe could have a better glide path. So let's just do that, but the affordability is key. We want our condo unit owners to be able to afford to stay in their units. It's really, really important.
Governor DeSantis, voters have been questioned by police investigating fraud in abortion petition signatures, have said that they felt intimidated. Are you concerned at all about that this investigation could lead to supporters of that amendment feeling intimidated by law enforcement?
Anyone who submitted a petition accurately that's a valid voter is totally within their rights to do it. They're not investigating that. What they're investigating is fraudulent petitions. They're investigating, I mean, we know that this group did submit on behalf of dead people. I don't know how you do that. I mean, I thought that was a Chicago thing, but yet they did it here, right? And so we know that, and then you also know that there are documented examples, which FDLE is looking at, where the petition and the name does not match the signature that's on file, and that's just the reality. So the question is that a valid signature or not? And it may be that the signature is totally different, and that voter will say, no, I actually did do that. Maybe they signed their name. That is absolutely possible. And if that's what you say, I think that's probably the end of it. But I do think that that they've identified examples that are not valid, and they absolutely need to be. Anyone that is trying to commit fraud in this process absolutely should be held accountable. And what I found is if people know that there's accountability, then it really deters others from wanting to do it in the future. The fact of the matter is the state, I mean, since we've had the election unit, it's only been a few years, there have been people prosecuted who are illegally in the country who voted. We had a guy in Broward, he said, oh yeah, Broward told me I could vote. And I don't doubt that happened. I bet you someone told him that. So then he goes and he votes, and then he admits he's not a U.S. citizen and not even in the country legally. And then you have some people that may vote in different jurisdictions. I mean, we got a lot of snowbirds, and that's great, but you don't get to vote in New York and Florida, okay? You're a voter one of the two. So if that happens, you could be held accountable. We also have prohibitions on sex offenders, and people have committed homicides from voting as convicts, and yet that has happened where people have done it. Well, guess what? They've been held accountable. So I think that that's important. here, we know what the laws are, let's just all abide by them, and then let's hold people accountable who didn't do it. And that's true whether it's actually voting, and some of these elections have been very close for local offices. I mean, you're talking about sometimes a primary can be decided by like 50 or 100 votes. That's happened in South Florida recently. So having people that aren't eligible to vote do it. And oh, by the way, our state constitution says you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote in any Florida election. So we got to uphold that. It's interesting how in the federal, you have people are crying about just saying on the budget that you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote in any of these elections coming up in November. Why would that be something that would be controversial? Well, the reason why is because you've had some of these cities around the country, we haven't allowed it in Florida, they have registered non-citizens to vote in the elections. And I'm just thinking to myself, if you as an American showed up to like France and said you wanted to vote, I don't think they would let you. If you showed up to Japan and said you just wanted to vote, I don't think that they would let you. I think they would say, no, it's for Japanese citizens or for French citizens. And so why would we be doing this as a country where some of these municipalities are doing it? And what they'll say is, well, it's only for local elections, you know, that they control. It's not for the federal. But how are you going to police that? Once you've said they can vote, they're going to go in, they can get a ballot and then do. So I think that the Democrats are making a big mistake by fighting on citizen voting. To me, that's a no-brainer. And I also look at what's happening across this country. You look at what's happening in Ohio, where they brought in all these illegal immigrants from Haiti, and they have like tens of thousands now in this one little town in Ohio. It's just overwhelming all the services. So you've had a massive open border, and deliberately bringing people in and dropping them in certain communities, which you just can't handle that type of influx. So there's a lot to answer for, I think. It'd be interesting to see, you know, how Kamala answers this in the debate tomorrow night, because I think it's just indefensible, having been the borders are, and then all of a sudden you have this massive influx, and it's not just people from Mexico. I mean, you got people from the Middle East, you got people from China, you got people from all around the globe that are going across the southern border. You know, I've talked about this before, but Florida, we've got a lot of retired special ops people who were serving in the global war on terrorism in Afghanistan, Iraq, after 9/11. And they still have contacts in places like Afghanistan. And what they said is once the Biden debacle happened 3 years ago, that these training camps for terrorists were stood back up. And what are they training? They're training to send to the southern border to come across and infiltrate the country that way. They don't even have to do what they did on 9/11, where they had to get visas, and they were expired, but they actually did. So there's a huge amount of problem with what's happening by abandoning the rule of law when it comes to secure borders, and when it comes to really valuing, you know, there's people that would crawl over hot coals barefoot to become a U.S. citizen, to do it the right way. I think it really diminishes what a lot of people have gone through to become a citizen when you're saying, like, you don't have to be a citizen to vote, that you get benefits if you come illegally, which you do in places like California and some of these other places, the federal government giving you benefit. Someone was asking me about, they had a relative that had been applying to be a visa, it's been tough and all that, and like, what are your recommendations? Like, well, you know, we don't do immigration in Florida. It's a federal issue in terms of a visa, but the truth is, it's easier to just come through the border than to actually apply normally. Like that's just the truth. How did we get to this point in this country where this is going on? So I think there's a whole host of issues about making sure that citizenship matters, making sure that we're respecting the sanctity of what being an American citizen means, making sure we're respecting our borders, but certainly respecting how this works in the context of these elections. And, you know, we want all citizens to have their voice. We don't want people who aren't citizens to be participating in this process, because that is not the way this process was designed. I mean, just think about, you talk about like foreign interference. I mean, just think about if we just said we're not going to check to see sure you're a citizen. I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen as a result of allowing stuff like that. So we're doing it right in Florida. We're going to uphold the law. I'm confident that if there is fraudulent activity, that'll be referred and done accordingly. If people sign petitions and it looks, for whatever reason, if someone is questioning that, if you signed it, you signed it, and you have a right to sign them. But you don't have a right to submit on behalf of dead people. If you're submitting signatures that are not matching the voter file, that's cause for concern. We want to make sure that all this stuff is done on the up and up. Okay, well, we are going to be back, hopefully, to be able to announce that we've got a pathway forward on the condos. Like I said, I think that it needs to be done this calendar year. I don't think you can wait until the spring when the legislature meets for regular session. They are going to be back for organizational session and a bunch of different times between now and the end of the year. I know these deadlines are approaching. We're very sensitive to that, and we expect and hope that that the legislature agrees and will want to move accordingly. So let's continue to get the ideas brought to the table. I think we've got some good ones. I think there's probably some more out there, and let's make sure that that we give people the relief that they need. So thanks everyone for coming.